You're listening to Nick Luck Daily, bringing you the latest news and the best interviews from around the world of horse racing. This episode is brought to you by the Racehorse Owners Association, by Thoroughbred Racing Commentary's global rankings in partnership with the Saudi Cup, and by the Fitzdares Club. Good morning, it is Tuesday, April the 20th. Please do stay tuned for what I think is one of the most engaging interviews so far in our Weatherbys Round the Bloodstock World Series, this time with Indian breeder Ameeta Mehra, who has achieved something quite extraordinary, both professionally and personally. And I'm very pleased now for the first time in this segment to head to India, to Patadi in Haryana, about 100 k's from Delhi, to the Usha Stud Farm, owned by Ameeta Mehra, who's also the chief executive, and Ameeta joins me now. Ameeta, thank you for talking to me today. Perhaps we could start. You could just tell us a little bit about the history of this very storied stud farm.
The stud farm started in 1973. My father, who was then in the army, Major P.K. Mehra, he was the commandant of the president's bodyguard. He began the stud farm while he was in the army with one stallion which he imported from England called Grey Gaston, and two mares that he actually brought on ship in those days, travelled with the mares himself, and he started in the backyard of his cantonment home. That's how the farm started, and the first few foals that he produced, one of them won the Indian Derby, and that's how he went from rags to riches, so to speak. So he had the fillip to begin the farm, take premature retirement, and that's how the Usha Stud Farm story began.
And what had sparked his initial interest and love and passion for the thoroughbred?
Well, he was actually a horseman. He was in the 61st Cavalry, and then he was playing polo. He was the captain of the Indian team. He had played polo in England. In fact, there was a story just yesterday in the Indian papers about how he had written because he was very friendly with Prince Philip in those days, and Prince Philip had come to Jaipur where my father was commanding the regiment, and he came to his home. They played polo together, so it was basically his whole love for the game, and the only thing he knew was horses, so he said he'd rather begin a career in horses than in anything else, and that's what brought him to horses.
And when you were growing up, was it always your destiny to do this, to take this on?
Well, not really. I was a bit of a rebel. Of course, because we were in the army, we all rode in the morning, and I competed in show jumping and so on, dressage and various other horsey activities. But at the age of about 14, I decided to rebel, and I said, no, I'm not going to do this. But I think it possibly was in my blood, because after the few you say the horrible teens, when you want to do the opposite of what your father is doing or your parents are doing. When I turned 23 and 24, I joined my father, and I realized that really this was what was attracting me, and he made a deal with me where I joined him in the farm, and he sent me off for training abroad.
And so where did your training take you?
Well, the first place I went to was the Irish National Stud, where I did the stud farm management course. I must say, in India we don't have a culture of such hard work. We have a lot of staff here, so I had blue feet and had a sore eye, but I managed quite well. I did a project on stallion selection, which really stood me in very good stead later. And then from there I went to Kentucky to do my equine nutrition course. I studied under Joe Pagan and Steve Jackson, actually the foremost nutritionists, and they told me when I was living with them that this was the only time they were going to have a student come and stay with them, because I was stealing all their secrets. But so I had, these were the two places that I actually went and studied, horse management and horse feeding.
And you came back to India. How quickly did you then enjoy success with your father?
Well, I have to say, I came back in 1992 after the Irish national the stint there, and then I joined my father in 1993 after the Kentucky placement. And I have to say that within 4.5 years, I produced my first Indian Derby winner in Indictment by Razin. My father had bought this amazing stallion in 1992 called Razin. He was a son of Northern Dancer, and he really changed the landscape of Indian breeding and Indian racing. He's even till today, he's probably one of the breed shapers in the industry as far as a stallion is concerned. And I was determined to produce a top class horse, because my father had said, I was in a very meager salary, and he said, if you can produce me an Indian Derby winner, I will treble, or I don't know what, he was going to really give me a massive salary. And I thought, well, that is worth working for. And he thought that it would take me at least 8 or 10 years, but I did it in 4.5.
And then, Ameeta, your life was to completely change in 2001. Just for those who aren't familiar, just explain what happened to you.
Oh, well, yes, it did change. In 2001, about after 9 years of being at the stud farm under the guidance of my father, I lost my family in a helicopter crash in India, in a hill station. My mother, my father, and my sister were in the same helicopter, and it crashed in very unusual circumstances. One of the strange things that happened, and one day my entire destiny changed. I was left alone with the reins of not only Usha Stud, but having to cope with a tragedy that which I don't think words can explain what took place.
Words can't explain it, and there is no one listening to this who will be able to really have any comprehension of what you were going through at that time. Try and tell me a little bit about how the business, how the stud, and about how horses carried you through that time.
Well, I have to say that I was in two minds whether I would be able to really take on the full management and reins, because my father was doing all the selling and all that, and I was doing the background work of managing the stud farm. And frankly, though I was interested, I wasn't as passionate as he was at that point, and I had double minds, whether I should continue or not. And I wasn't sure whether I was going to be able to succeed in the way that he had succeeded. And so I was in a very strange place of being extremely caught. And then when I went to Bombay for the Indian Oaks, which happened to be about 10 days later, I just got on back to work. A lot of people met me, and I remember that one of my competitors, the biggest stud farm, and one of the biggest, they came up to me and he shook my hands and he said, "Oh, I suppose you're going to close down now. You won't be able to manage the stud farm after your parents, obviously, Do you have a cousin or a brother that can help you out?" Yeah. And this sort of thing went on a bit, a couple of times, at different moments. And I think my blood started boiling, and I just, went stone cold. And I think it was at that point that I decided to take up the stud farm seriously. And I said, no, I think I will be able to manage. Thank you so much. Then there was a hostile bid to buy over my farm by some of my competitors. And that made me even more steely. And then the third thing was that I began to sell my horses, and they said, "You can't demand the prices your father did. He was a very good marketeer." So they made a cart cartel against me the following year, some of my buyers. I said, we won't buy from her. And obviously she's going to bring down her prices. And I just went through that like steel. It's like, something just, I think what got me through was that I thought to myself, nothing can be as bad as what I've gone through. So if I went through that, this is nothing. So I just stayed put. I didn't change my prices. I refused to budge, but I was very quiet and still. And suddenly everything just opened up for me. And I won the Indian Oaks that year when I went to Bombay amongst a lot of cheering, amongst the entire crowd was with me. And after that, the next year. After my father passed away in 2003, I won the Indian Derby again with a horse that I owned myself and bred called Psychic Flame, and it was like raining success. It was all the fruits of the quiet labor that had gone into the farm that started paying up, and the whole farm started building up, and there was just success after success after success, and there's no words to describe it.
And you're doing, and you have done, his and your family's legacy, unbelievably proud. I want to ask you about Multidimensional, and can you just give me an idea of the impact that he's had since you've stood him?
Yes, he's been I think the champion stallion since the first year he came to India. He was freshman sire, champion sire, then he became champion stallion for 6 years, except for 1 year in between. And he is again this year, once again, the champion stallion of India. He's been phenomenal. He's been quite a breed shaper. His daughters are now back at stud. He's produced the Indian Derby winner this year called Immortality, which I own and ran in my own colors. He produces 60% of the black type and graded races in the country every single year. I would say that he's probably the Galileo of India.
And speaking of Galileo, I wanted to talk a little about Dovial, because people often wonder what happens to some of the horses who excel globally, and they're not standing in the UK or Ireland or France. They're sort of slightly out of sight, out of mind, and we can happily say that Dovial is about to embark on a pretty exciting career.
I would say so. I think with the kind of broodmare band that we've got, and it's like, it's almost like wine growers. I've been nourishing families and daughters and granddaughters and great-granddaughters and great-great-granddaughters of classic winners. And the idea of bringing Dovial in this year to cover our mares is the next step for me is to go global, is to go to South Asia. And my dream is to have an international carnival kind of event and invite, horses from different countries to come and compete here. And likewise, I think Dovial will bring in a certain quality. He'll add something to the Danehill blood. And as you know, there's a fabulous nick between Galileo and Danehill. So I imagine that, I'm preparing myself to see if I can add a little bit of, what should I say, interest in trying to race and take my horses abroad to race, and also to bring in some international flavor into Indian racing.
Well, we've talked so much on this podcast about how we can, increase the globalization of the sport, try and cross-pollinate, all enjoy each other's racing and each other's cultures, and it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. And given what you've already achieved, Ameeta, I have absolute confidence that your next goal will be realised before too long. Thanks so much for talking to me.
Thank you so much, Nick.
My thanks to Ameeta Mehra, and of course to Fergal O'Brien and to Joseph O'Brien earlier in the show. Lee, I think it's fair to say that Ameeta has had an extraordinary journey, and it's wonderful to hear that she's doing so well with her stud in India now.
Yeah, what an incredible story, Nick. Obviously, with a particularly heartbreaking, tragic chapter in it, and the way she has fought back from that, and the way she has fought back from the sexism subsequently presented to her, I think paints her as a remarkable lady, and all power to her.
You've been listening to Nick Luck Daily, brought to you in association with FitzDares, the Racehorse Owners Association, and Thoroughbred Racing Commentary.